Hey everybody, Sunshine here. So I got a few requests to sort of see how I put a flange in these boxes, and so I thought I'd go through that really quick. I'm choosing a smaller box than one of the long narrow ones because the long narrow ones are a little more complicated and take a bit longer, and this one I can just illustrate how I do that thing. Anyway, so a couple things. So this is a nice sort of leather hard state to work in. What I'm really looking for is that when I take this off, when I cut it off, that it will retain its shape, but can take some malleability. Like, I don't want it to be like bone dry. It makes it really hard, but it needs to be able to hold its shape really well. Otherwise, I'll lose the fit on the box. So be really mindful of that. This is sat for a day and a half under plastic. And so now it's about ready. So a couple different ways to determine where I want to put where I want the lid to sit. So this is going to be a little flour brick. So really I want there to be a bigger water reservoir. So somewhere in here is where the flange will go. But so say if you were making a butter dish, the flange can go down here, right? So it depends on what you're using your object for, okay? If this is a round object, I would just spin it and make a mark, most likely. You can use a ruler and measure and then make a line. Another great use of the sunshine stick is to sort of determine where you want your lid, and you can make a mark, like hold your needle tool in the notch. I'll just do that, it's a little bit easier to see. Hold it in the notch and then sort of drag it all the way around, just gently marking, depending on where you sort of want it to be. So that just takes a little bit more coordination sometimes. Another thing that I do is I have a little template with straight lines. I use this a lot for gridding out patterns that I'm going to pierce. And it's just made with watercolor paper, and then I cut it out, measure it, and that way this also just makes a really great template for making straight lines around a three-dimensional object, and it's really quick. I just hold it up, make a mark. So I'm just going to do that really quick, and I'll just do that. The trick is to choose the same line all the way around. That's always tricky. Because sometimes around corners of square objects, you can kind of lose for some reason, that curve feels a little bit bigger. So you can see I just made a mark all the way around. And now I'm going to cut with my X-Acto and cut that apart. So one of the things I always want to do before I take the lid off is basically mark where this is going to fit, right? So I make little hatch marks there so that I know which way this lid is going to go on, because if I don't, it only fits one way, and if I don't, then I'm like turning it and turning and turning until maybe it fits or maybe it doesn't. So this way I know exactly what side goes with what and save myself a little time. Okay, so I'm going to start somewhere mid-wall, and I'm going to start cutting around the line that I made. And I'm just going to go slow and steady. I drag my little pinky finger there to keep my hand steady on top. A lot of times people think that you're just sort of out in the middle of the air, like cutting, and wonder how you can do that so precisely. I'm not out in the air. My fingers are acting as a guide. And I'm just I go slow and steady. This sort of is like the texture or the consistency of like cheddar cheese right now. So pretty easy to cut. Another reason that I'm going to start mid-wall on this, where I make the cut, is so if I come around the corner and I'm way off, I can kind of guide that back to center. And if I did it at the corner and then I'm off, I have no chance to really kind of realize like, oh, I'm a little bit off, I need to change it. And so sometimes you'll find that if you start in the corner, you'll have a little like quarter-inch gap there, which is kind of a drag. Okay, so taking it off. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the interior, clean up the interior of the box. And a lot of times I use my wood knife, which I sell these online. They kind of have a square bottom, and mostly because I love to do this. So it's like I'm able to clean up the corner a little bit. If you guys can kind of see the before. This one I didn't overly score. You can kind of see there's a few score marks, but really all I'm going to do is compress this corner, make sure that wall is really tight on there. I don't want to see any kind of dark shadows under there. I want to fill all that gap in. So one of the things that happens with these, and I think a lot of people are taught this way, is that they are taught to roll out a little itty bitty soft coil and stick it in the corner. And I have found I've had less success with that and more so with just really scoring well, making sure my wall thickness is right so that I have a really nice attachment here. One of the things that happens if you put a coil in, so sometimes this is too leather hard and the coil's too soft and it just won't fit or it won't stay in place. And then you end up pushing and pushing and you push your wall out of shape. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong by adding too much clay in the space where you don't want it to. And also, like, if your wall is shallow here, that can also be a problem by adding too much clay so that the flange won't fit over it. And one of the things I forgot to sort of mention is that you want at least 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch for your lid, because think about the flange is going to come up to at least here. So you want to be able to make sure your lid will slide over the flange. So make sure that you're taking that into account when you decide what size you want your lid to be. Okay, so next I'm going to do is I'm going to take away this interior sharp edge, and I just use my cheese cutter sort of gently. You can use an X-Acto, whatever kind of works. If it's firm enough, you can use kind of that like drywall sandpaper. Really, all I really want is just that little sharp corner to be beveled in. Makes it easier to slide over the flange, but also, you know, any sort of sharp edge is just going to get batted around and chipped and broken. So I really want to make sure that I have a nice soft kind of edge now. So the next step is to roll this outside edge over. And so I use the back of my thumbnail and I kind of just gently go over that edge. And what I want to do is sort of create a little bit of a rolled edge. It kind of stops the glaze, but also gives it a little bit of a shadow between these two forms, right? And so I'll do the same on the bottom, but let's go over that really quick one more time. And so then that's done. I'm just going to set that to the side. Now I'm going to roll the outside edge of the bottom here. And this I do first because once I put a flange in, it's more difficult to do, okay? So you guys can kind of see just what a nice kind of little gap that provides. A little bit firmer. It's like basically just a little bit safer. And it sort of helps if there's any kind of, your line's not very straight. It sort of softens that look. And it's not that, not that big a deal. I mean, the funny thing about these little boxes is it's all just the tiniest details to make them look right, and for them to come together. Sorry, guys. Okay, so now I'm going to score down about 1/2 inch, the width of this, basically. So I'm trying not to go over that top edge, but I want to have a really nice sort of scored attachment, right? This is going to be where your flange and your box come together. So it's a very precarious sort of spot. I just want you to sort of see, and you kind of see what's happening all the way around. Then I'm going to have a piece of clay that's basically about 1 inch wide and about the same thickness as my wall. That's pretty important. I don't want it too thin because I want it to be able to take the battery of having a lid come up and over it many times. Flanges and boxes, they get treated kind of roughly out in the world. So you just want to be mindful that you're making a pretty sturdy object. Okay, so then just a little bit of water slip. My water bucket's a little bit slippy at the moment. It's amazing how dry it is here in Montana. Like, things just evaporate really quickly. Okay, so I'm opening up those pores again. But I really want it nice and scored. There we are, so you can kind of see. Okay, so now I'm going to again start somewhere mid-wall when I'm attaching this. And I'm just going to come down that sort of 1/2 inch that I scored. And I'm just going to gently but firmly press it in, okay? Okay. And ideally, you want to come around and have it finish in one piece, okay? My big boxes I'm having, because they're so big, it was 2 pieces. But when you're first practicing, it's really nice to just get it in. That way you have one chance where a seam is gonna come apart. Seams are harder to compress, so you really wanna just make sure you're getting good compression on your seams, okay? So let me really quickly, you can kind of see. So it's just gently pressed in there. I'm gonna come around and press it with my thumb and backstop it with my fingers on the outside, just to make sure that that attachment is really just well sealed, okay? And what's happening is it means I'm kind of tapering that bottom edge down and more flat into the wall. And so I'm gonna use my wood knife and really compress that seam down and make that seam kind of disappear, okay? So this is what it looks like before. You can kind of see. Little angle there. Anyways, okay. And now a lot of times my wood knife, so I sell these guys, they're one of my, like my second favorite tool. I use it quite a bit in my practice because it acts as a rib. I can use it as a rib, but I also don't have to put my whole hand and a rib inside. I can just use this kind of as an extension of my finger, but get some rib action and clean up my seams without gouging the bottom or getting too much fuss in there. And it's really handy. I mean, with everything, it takes a little practice to use, but it can be a really handy tool. I use it for almost every single form. Once I get a couple coils up, this becomes the rib that I use on the inside. And it's really handy for putting these flanges in, because I can really get in there and compress and taper it into the wall. Okay. Just clean it up. And this is like, you can fuss. That's the thing with boxes. You can really just fuss and fuss. I always like, if there's going to be something with food in it, or if like this is going to have flowers in it, I don't want a lot of overhangs. Okay, you can kind of see that sort of seam has disappeared now. You can kind of still see it, but there's no overhang. I like to get rid of the overhang as much as possible. Okay. So once I've got the inside cleaned up, now I'll come and address the outside of the flange. And so what I like to use are these green trail ribs with this sort of right angle, or a little metal rib that I've cut and that has a nice clean sharp edge. And so my goal is, if you can kind of see, it's just kind of messy. There's some score marks, some gaps. I want to make sure that all those gaps are filled in. I don't see any sort of dark spaces. But I'm also going to make sure that my flange slightly tapers towards the center so that my lid will slip over it, okay? So I'm just going to come at it and support it from the inside, but I'm really just gently coming around and round. And I don't want to press way over. You know, I want to think about this lid seat. Like, the thickness of my wall is my lid seat. So if I press too much and push this too far in, I'm going to have a big like bubble on the inside, or I'm going to tear it away from the wall. So I want to be really careful and mindful of this. I don't want to add any water because I'm going to dry these together. So if I add water to this and this becomes sticky, I'm not going to be able to get that lid off, right? So these will also get dried together and fired together and glaze fired together, right? They go through the whole process together. So, you know, I don't glaze this lid seat area, but I'm very mindful of that. So I'm just cleaning it up round and round, slow and steady. And so part of the reason I make the flange so big is it gives me a lot of clay to work with, and I can clean it up really nicely, but I don't need that much flange, right? And so I can now cut away and make it even. So at the point when I put it on, I don't have to worry about it being even, because I know I'm going to cut away and make it even. And so if you guys can sort of see the seams, how nice and clean they are, there's no like gaps. If I ever see anything that's like a dark shadow or a little black hole, I will just come back and recompress this. So, because this little seam here is where the clay will want to pull away from the wall, okay? So now I'm just going to cut off the excess, and I actually just do this by eye because I find it a little clumsy to do the sunshine stick or like a cutoff wire or the cheese cutter. I just do it by hand this way, and I don't worry about it being overly even. I just need it to be a little more manageable size. And I've learned to go, if I go slow and steady, it's a really nice, relatively even flange, right? So, boom, there we go. So the other thing is, so now there's lots of ways to sort of finish this edge. You're going to want to take away the sharpness of those corners. And the way I address it is I basically just gently kind of pinch it inside and out, and always sort of with a little more pressure from the outside so it sort of tapers more towards the inside of the pot. Just again to reinforce that it's going to have a lid that's going to slide over it. Because the important part of the fit is where the flange meets the wall. And so that is what needs to be the same sort of thickness as the wall. Or the same, like, you don't want to overshoot your wall, right? But this top part, it's just there as a guide. So I just go round and round and I pinch it. Just slow and steady and kind of gently. And part of this is because I don't need it to be like a clean cut edge, because that doesn't really match the form. This form is a hand-built, hand-tooled, kind of all around form. And I just want it to be a nice, soft sort of edge, okay? And if I see any little things, I'll just try to address them now. Now is my opportunity to really sort of clean this up, right? So now you can kind of see how that looks. Just nice and gentle. I try not to mess with too much on the inside. There's all these boogers in there. I take those out after bisque, or if I want to and I'm leather checking things when they're drying, I'll just take a dry brush. Once everything's kind of set up, they just come out really easy then. Like if I was doing that right now, like just with a dry brush and get those little boogers out. But I want to wait until really most of the clay is leather hard, because otherwise then I get little boogers in my wet clay, which just happened. Ugh. So you just want to do those things when it's ready. Okay, so now I'm going to double check where my mark is, and then I'm going to try to get this thing to put on here. Boom. And so if I have problems with fit, I'll just sort of gently pull a box in a little bit, usually from the body of the box, the bottom part. I make sure that it's kind of on there. And I make sure it comes off and I haven't squished the flange. If anything's stuck, I'll just kind of gently clean it up. Like I got a little, excuse me, a little gap here that happened. But I just want to clean it up. Let's see. There we go. Okay. There you go. So now what will typically happen, I have been doing these most of the day, and so these are pretty close to, these are ready really for me to cut the pierced top, but I really want to get all the flanges in before I start to think about more of a decorative element, because I can just keep these under plastic. There's enough moisture in that flange that it will help, it'll equalize again, so if I want to wait till tomorrow, I'll just cover everything up. But I usually keep these under plastic until now I'm ready to do some type of pattern cutting. And I'll do another video about that probably tomorrow or the next day. So just a quick thing about the videos. I'm really enjoying making them right now, and so I am going to be putting them up on my YouTube channel. So if you're interested in not necessarily having to save them on Instagram, please go to my YouTube channel, like and subscribe. I'll be trying to post the videos that I make in the day, that same day. But then they're there for you to catalog, and that'd be a really great resource, hopefully, for people. So anyways, thank you guys. And this is a little lidded box, okay? Happy making. Bye.